everybody. Welcome to our first Conservation Cafe in person since 2023. 2020. Thank you for being, I was just telling Kathy that I didn't have coffee this afternoon, so thank you for being with us. And who's been to a Conservation Cafe before, virtual or in person? We have some first-timers, which is super exciting. Thank you for joining us. The idea behind Conservation Cafe was originally to have intimate talks with snacks and coffee with people who are doing great conservation work in the region. We've also had some people who have worked nationally, even internationally. Mostly they were here for the first couple years of their existence, but very occasionally we went somewhere else. And then we moved online. And we are going to continue to use a hybrid model, which we're going to evolve over time. So this one we're recording. We'll place the recording available afterwards for anyone who wasn't able to be here. We're going to try, Ben doesn't know this, but I want to try live streaming in May when we'll be here again, but we're going to try live streaming. And then we will also return to virtual sometimes, especially in the winter when, why come out here in the winter? We could sit at home and be cozy. So we are going to experiment with format. But so Conservation Cafe is for conversation, it's for inspiration, and it's for snacks. And Kathy Benjamin, I said it before, made the snacks, but I really want to shout her out because she has been helping create Conservation Cafe since its very inception in 2017 and has been to every single one unless she was sick or at rehearsal. And so, book group rehearsal? Anyway, we really appreciate it. Nature Forward, we have our new name since last year, but our mission and vision have stayed the same. And a really important part that we focus on with our advocacy includes the importance of making a broader community of people who treasure the natural environment and work to protect it. And that's where we have really, really worked hard for the last few years on our advocacy work, is on broadening the perspectives that we advocate on behalf of, that we carry ourselves, and the people with whom we work and encourage to advocate as well. Oops. If you're on social media, you're welcome to tweet, Instagram, or Facebook us, and please tag us if you do. About a little bit, I'm going to introduce myself first, and then I'm going to let these wonderful people introduce themselves. I'm the Director of Conservation here at Nature Forward. I've been here since 2016. My name is Eliza Cava. My pronouns are she, her, hers. But on my name tag, it also says ella because I speak Spanish. And I'm just thrilled to be here and to have this amazing team. And shout out that we are part of the department, conservation department here at Nature Forward. But there's one more member of the department, Greg Trilling. And Greg has opinions, but he does not advocate very much in his professional life. Instead, he leads our community science water quality monitoring program and a lot of outreach to people all around the region around watershed education. So we're delighted to have him. We're part of the team. We all work together, but these are the three advocates. So now, our mighty team of advocates.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Denise Guitarra. My pronouns are she, ella, and I'm the Maryland Conservation Advocate. So thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, are we doing anything?
Hello, good evening. I'm Jamani Overby. My pronouns are she, her. I serve as the DC Conservation Advocate, and thank you all for being here. And this is my first in-person Conservation Cafe.
I'm Renee Grebe. I'm with she, hers, and I'm the Northern Virginia Conservation Advocate. And this is, I hardly remember my first in-person Conservation Cafe.
Well, thank you all. So before we dive in, the next thing I want to talk to you about is our conservation priorities. So Nature Forward, previously Audubon Naturalist Society, was founded to do conservation. We were founded by a group of mostly women, some men, to help protect birds from overhunting, and back in 1897. So we've had conservation as the core of our work for the entirety of our existence. But the resources that we've been able to dedicate to it and the issues that we touch on have really changed over time. So I started in 2016, And we really had a lot of strength in watershed and water quality issues primarily, and secondarily on land use issues associated with them, meaning what's the land use planning, what's the zoning, what are the development densities that are coming, and how does the runoff of polluted stormwater from those developed areas affect our streams and water quality. My predecessor, Diane Cameron, was a stormwater, an environmental engineer with expertise in stormwater and really focused the program on helping keep our streams clean. And so that was the role that I stepped into. In 2018, in October of 2018, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its report on how little time we had left to fight climate change before it became catastrophic, I think is the word that was used in the report. David, you can back me up on that. And that inspired one of our major donors to say, I've worked with you and supported you, Nature Forward, at the time Audubon Naturalist Society, for a long time. What are we doing on climate change and how can we do more? And my boss, Lisa Alexander, and I told her about about what we had been already doing, that a lot of what we did on development issues, land use, and water quality was related to climate change because the flooding is an enormous impact of climate change in our region with stronger storms. So we realized we were already working a lot on climate change related issues, but we weren't talking about it that way. And forests, we worked so much on forest conservation, which is also a key part of fighting climate change, but we weren't really talking about it from the climate change perspective. So our donor said, I'd like you to talk more from the climate change perspective. I'd like you to have more capacity to work more on all these issues with climate change at the forefront, and I'd like you to hire more staff. Thus was born our team of advocates. And we then simultaneously, or just as they came on, we developed we needed a task force. We needed to decide what were our priorities around these issues. So we developed a suite of 4 conservation priorities: human health and access to nature, biodiversity and habitats, that's our long-term strength, sustainable land use, and fighting the climate crisis. And they all weave together, and the issues that we work on touch on all 4 in many different ways, which you'll hear our advocates talk a little bit about. But with this as the background in terms of this is what we advocate for, tonight is going to be a lot about how we do it. And I've directed them to tell the silliest war stories they can about what it's like to be brave and stand up and testify before a packed hearing, or enter a new state house where you don't know anybody, or analyze an issue that you've never worked on before and try to come up with something intelligent to say. I will say another shout out too, we have some amazing research volunteers that have helped us with that, and a number of you are here, thank you. So we're gonna talk mostly about the how. And, this is the last one I was gonna show you when we talk about climate change. So what we're working on in our area, I can't read the slide. So the biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions in our area are transportation and buildings. And so those are not the same as biodiversity and habitats. They are sometimes, because if you want to build, or for example, widen a big highway, you're going to have a lot of forest and stream impacts, but you're also going to have a lot more auto emissions by letting all those cars not only drive on that highway, but live and work in the developments that will then sprawl out as a result of that increased commuting capacity. So by thinking about our work through a climate change lens, we realized that so much of what we did historically was already falling in this bucket, but we had this whole new vocabulary to talk about it with. So if you've heard a lot more from us about climate change recently, know that we talk about it in many different ways, and they all come back to those 4 priorities that are all, again, interwoven together for us. But you're going to hear us talk a little bit about looking for natural gas leaks in buildings, and you're going to say, what is Nature Forward doing looking for natural gas leaks in buildings? Well, Jamani will tell you more. All right, and with that, I'm going to leave it on this slide until we're ready to just look at some pictures. So first question, what is an advocacy success that you are proud of in your time with Nature Forward? Who wants to go first?
I'll start and I'll let Denise and Renee follow. I'll say something that I'm really proud of, and I've just started working with Nature Forward for the past 1.5 years or so. Something that I have been proud of, and a victory that I've actually seen throughout my time, it's like a lot of things happen. Not sure if it'll actually, go through in this cycle, but something that we did see was the migratory bird-safe buildings with that was passed and will be funded next year in DC. So that will make sure and ensure that we have less bird deaths, and also ensure that buildings are constructed with bird-safe windows. So really impacting the wildlife, and as we spoke about, connects directly with our priorities.
Yeah, I can speak of some Maryland wins, recent wins. If you've been seeing our action alerts or social media or blog posts, Montgomery County just passed its forest conservation law. Yeah, and those are the picks there. Unanimous vote. The full council passed it, and it's a fight we've been fighting for about 3 years in Montgomery County. So very, very exciting times for forests. But not only Montgomery County passed its strongest forest law, the state actually just passed its strongest forest law this past Monday at the end of the Maryland General Assembly. And that one has actually been a much longer fight for 7 years. So I know we have some of our longtime volunteers here that have been part since the beginning with Eliza on the forest fight, so way before my time at Nature Forward. And it just means that our forests will be more protected. Developers will be required to replant more trees if they cut down trees in a site. And it's great for wildlife, for people, and for the trees themselves, and the forest, of course.
Well, I'm from Virginia, so we don't have wins like that yet. But we're working on it. Last year, one thing we were really proud of was we worked to get, with a pretty broad coalition, to get funding for the Fairfax County Park Authority. Last year, or 2 years ago, we got Jay Cole from Montgomery County, and she's now our Park Authority director, and she's incredible. She's an African-American woman, an ecologist. She is talking the truth about what the funding is for our current Park Authority in a way that no one has ever done before. And it has really inspired the community of park advocates to, listen to what she's saying and speak up. And so we learned last year that the funding for our forest management in our parks was essentially non-existent. And we rallied around to ask for about $700,000. We got it, which is great. And we're continuing that advocacy this year. And this has been a coalition led by one of our partners, previously with Fairfax NAACP, but also the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, us, Friends of Holmes Run, Audubon Society of Northern Virginia, and lots of friends groups in the parks as well. So it's been really great to rally that many people. I think we got something on the realm of 50 or 60 comments from our action alert last year, which is pretty high for Fairfax County. And this year we've done another push. We're making progress. We'll see how the budget turns out. The budget hearings just wrapped up today for the budget, but we're asking for a whole bunch more this year for equity asks. So wish us luck.
We do. Well, thank you for those good success stories. And I know there's more that will come out. My next question is, I talked about our conservation priorities. And sometimes we all struggle with saying no. There's a lot to do, and there's only us and our volunteers and our coalition partners, but it's still not enough. So we struggle with saying no. But I wanted to ask you guys, you don't all have to answer if you don't have a great example, but how do you use our conservation priorities to guide what you choose to take on? And how do you use, we also have an internal document called Guidelines for Advocacy Campaigns, an internal policy that helps to tell us when we should and should not invest effort. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you do decision-making around choosing a campaign.
So this is quite relevant for the General Assembly time because we have over 1,000 bills that get introduced each session, and we are very eager to work on as many as we can. But of course, we can't because, as Eliza mentioned, there is some constraints because of capacity or time. So what we've done with our volunteers this session and previous sessions actually is we kind of look at what bills have introduced and how they fit our priorities. And also if it's something that we've been working on for other years. For example, like the forest bill, it's something that has been ongoing for many years, so that always comes up like first on our list. But this year we also had like the Green Space Equity Program. It ties into almost all of our priorities, so that was kind of like a given that we would choose it. So we kind of use that list to kind of guide us to which bills we should be working on. And even then it's hard because many bills still fall into our one or more of our priorities. So then we have to look into other categories. Is it something we've been working on? Do we have the expertise? Do we have the coalitions that can support us as well as we move through session?
I would say it's not. I feel like it's not often that you have a boss that tells you that you need to say no. But luckily enough, Eliza does encourage us to say no because, like Denise mentioned, there are so many things to want to focus on. And I will say, since like being with Nature Forward, the way that I'm able to choose the priorities and in a way, I like to focus on how it impacts like the primary communities that we work with in DC, which are Ward 7 and 8. So like Eliza said, our priorities really weave together, but the core of my work is also focusing on intersectionality of how all of those things can kind of work together and how they relate to communities. So anywhere where I can talk about housing and electrification, that's somewhere that I can, piece that together. And, Black equity and home ownership is something that we can also like all put together that all relates to environmentalism and health. So it's so many intersectionalities within the climate work that it's kind of hard to make a decision, but it makes it easier when that you also have that passion within yourself to pursue it, and it relates directly to the community that you are working with.
I'll just say really briefly to raise up what Jamani just said. When you work in a community, you know that community. So you might know the issues better too. You know the reasons, the deeper history behind why you want to work on that certain issue. So that's certainly an important one. And then is it precedent setting or not? Is what the decision's going to be, is that going to change a policy by the way they're implementing it? It's also important.
I'm going to provide a little context. I didn't ask the advocates to talk about this, but they have very, very broad job descriptions. So they have to analyze policy, they have to organize and advocate on our desired solutions to those policies, and they actually lead environmental education outreach activities with specific communities where we've decided we want to invest time and resources. And these are, by definition, we only choose to work with communities that, first of all, want to work with us, where we have a primary community-based partner organization that is interested in having more environmental programming or advocacy among the communities that they work with and serve. And then, these communities are low income and typically communities that are mostly of color. So Jamani was mentioning in Ward 7 and 8. In Ward 8, we have our program Ward 8 Water Watchers, which Jamani leads. In Fairfax County, along the Route 1 corridor near Little Hunting Creek, on the inland side of it, which is the lower income side of it, where there are some still mobile home communities remaining and some subsidized housing complexes. Renee leads a project there called Water Protectors of Little Hunting Creek. And Denise has been working now for all 4 years of her time with us in the Long Branch community outside of Silver Spring to connect neighbors there to their stream. And so in each of these cases, they're out, and Greg supports us a lot on this, doing like stream walks, cleanups, nature walks, talking to people about how their stream could be healthier, helping them identify bugs. And then they later talk to them about advocacy and ask them, for example, hey, there's a park planning process going on around here. What are your opinions on the park? Anyway, they do a lot. I didn't ask them. We're not going to talk in detail about those outreach projects, but you can see them on our website. So my next question to you guys is, tell me about a time that you did not achieve a good conservation outcome, that you were disappointed. What went wrong? Virginia.
I live in Virginia. There was a project in the city of Fairfax that we got involved in that was proposing to bury a stream and take out 5 acres of forest. And that was a project that ultimately the stream is buried and the forest is now gone. the very first site visit I did there, I pulled up and a barred owl was hooting from the forest, and I think I might have actually cried that day. Greg helped us come out and look at macros. It was a really fun location. We got advocates involved ultimately to do plant saves there, and I have some of those native plants at my yard now, which is wonderful to remember it by. But it didn't work, and I think one reason we weren't successful in stopping this or altering to make the project a little bit more integrated with the stream was we got involved too late. We found out about it too late. They advertise these things in print newspapers in a corner of something, and if somebody happens to find out about it, then you know that there's a public hearing on it. We found out too late. It was really far along, but the really good thing that came out of it was that we actually ended up building an amazing cohort of environmental advocates there. They've since had elections in their city council, and they've gotten a new environmentally focused council member. They have a network now that they can use, and it's been really powerful, even though the development did unfortunately end up burying the stream. So some sad and some good out of it.
I'll just mention a short story relating with the Maryland General Assembly. So last year, there was one bill called the Environmental Human Rights Amendment. And basically, it wanted to add an amendment so that everybody had the right to like a healthy environment, basically. And it was one of those legislations that had been trying to pass for many, many years, but it didn't pass last year. And last year was kind of the last time that they could try before the elections, because it was supposed to come as one of the questions in the ballot. And it was something that other states had also passed. And, we had a strong coalition, lots of support from various organizations, nonprofit sectors, and it still didn't make it. So it was a little bit disappointing, but I think, the coalition's still there, just like in Renee's case. These things happen, and I think that's one of the key things of advocacy is like just keep trying, even if it doesn't result in something positive or a change that you want to see, because maybe you have a chance later on to try again or make it even stronger later.
Do you have one? Not yet. Not yet. It's only been a year and a half for Jumani. So we just talked about sort of good and bad outcomes, and now I'd like to ask you to talk about compromise. So what do you do when you get half a loaf, and how do you decide whether we're going to celebrate something or we're going to feel like that was a loss? And Renee, you started touching on that because, you're looking at the long term after the City of Fairfax fight and how Renee, spurred some culture change among a community of advocates there. But what else? What are some other examples where you have to accept compromise? Virginia's going to answer first again.
We had a training in Virginia with a coalition that we were putting together about compromise, working on how to cite bicycle paths, active transportation paths. And we were talking about how we come together. How do we get everything for all of our partners? And they gave the great example of Jumani wants a lemon and I want a lemon. We only have one lemon. How do we get what we want? We could split the lemon in half, but that isn't helpful because Jumani wants to make a juice with the lemon juice, and I want to make something that needs lemon zest. But had we just talked about it, we wouldn't have split the lemon in half. We could have gotten 100% of what we wanted because we wanted different things. We weren't talking about the task of getting a lemon. We were talking about the end goal of what we wanted, needing the zest or needing the juice. And I think that really struck me as compromise might not be splitting something 50-50 down the way, but if you start early and you talk about what you want to get to, there's a way to get to everything. That's like the perfect vision of what we want, but I think it's a really different way to shift your mind and to make sure you do get in early in the process.
I was more still going to say, I feel like right now I'm currently in a midst of like something that looks like it might be a compromise with the defending BEPS. And BEPS is Building Energy Performance Standards that we have, that the district has now committed to having, in being able to electrify the city by, I want to say, 2032. It keeps changing. But for this time, I think we're also talking about healthy homes for all, and also being able to provide retrofits, electrification retrofits for low to moderate income housing. So right now, I feel like our compromise, what we're dealing with, is how we're going to get this funded and how we're going to be able to use federal funding and how we're going to get that from the council and working with the mayor on those things. So again, I feel like more so in the midst of compromise, but haven't had like a end story of compromise just yet.
Well, I also have a story, and I love the analogy that Renee just mentioned. And I would second that the compromise is not about 50-50, but like finding what everybody in the group actually really wants and then seeing how that works. The story that I have to share, it revolves around Thrive 2050, the general master plan, which if you live in Montgomery County, you know that it was a long, kind of drawn out topic for many years as it evolved from the planning department into the council. And some of the compromises that came along with Thrive were around outreach, like had enough outreach been done? And when the council was about to vote, they said no. So then they went on another series of outreach during the last summer, right before the council took another final vote in the fall. And then there were a compromise between where development should be kind of like focused on. So the final versions basically said that development should be focused around already transit hubs and main arterial highways so that we kind of protect the other green spaces that we have in the county, like the ag reserve or anything in the north where there's more forest and more parks. So it was like a long drawn out process, but I think it was also necessary to hear all those voices, all those people that had different ideas of how we should grow the county for the next 30 years. And of course, at the end, the plan was just a blueprint to go forward. The implementation phase, which is what is coming after and in which we are in the middle of, is the most important part, because that's where every little sector plan in the county, everybody will have a say on what they want to see in their communities and how it fits into the broader Thrive 2050 plan.
Thanks, everyone. So now I'm going to switch gears from the outcomes to the how. So I'd like to ask you to talk about some of the skills that you use, and I'm going to be specific with a couple of examples that you've already brought up. So you've all three talked about we. You've mentioned coalitions. What is it? What are the skills you use in being a part of and managing or leading a coalition? You've talked about testifying and writing comment letters and things like that. So what are some of the skills you use in those? You don't have to all say all of them. You could give different examples. And anything else. How do you mobilize the public? And how did you learn these skills? And you can say that I taught you some of them, but you also brought a lot with you. And so where did that come from? And what did your partners teach you? Like, how did you learn in a broad sense these skills? I'll give an example. I was a theater kid in high school and lost my fear of public speaking early on, and brought that with me when I came. But since coming here, I learned about writing action alerts and mobilizing, working directly with the public. I had not really done that before I worked here. So that's I want to elicit from you guys, what are the strengths that you brought? What did you learn? And what skill sets have you found to be surprisingly useful?
I guess I have brought, I guess, a lot of different things into the work. Prior to working with Nature Forward, I was able to intern with Maryland General Assembly. I was also able to intern on the Hill. So a lot of that background and research, not knowing exactly what I'm walking into sometimes, but being able to get that background knowledge like as soon as possible and get a nice gist of it and be able to speak on it and advocate on behalf of it is something that I've learned. But I'll speak on kind of working with coalitions and working with community is something that I've always had ease with. Those interpersonal personal skills when I was in college. I like every summer I did their alternative break program, which meant that I spent another week or a few weeks in a different place working with different community members on issues that actually impacted them, and talking with community members about what things mattered to them, and not really coming in with my own preconceived notions or my own interests, but being able to remedy that and having some balance in between what I was interested in and what actually meant something to the community and how I can make that impact. So with that, I feel like it's been really easy to work with of a lot of different people, like from our volunteers here to our community members in DC to our coalitions. I feel like I have conversations with ease. I'm able to conflict manage in some of our coalitions really well. People feel comfortable coming to me with different issues, and able to kind of synthesize that into how we can make it productive. So I've also learned that from Eliza. I've also learned to really just mobilize not only the parts of me where I know like the research and the knowledge, but also the personal parts and being able to connect and have stories and storytelling with our action alerts and making sure that we're not only just connecting. I'm easy to connect with people like one-on-one like this, but connecting with people through our words and our speech and our blog posts, and being able to do that is definitely something I've learned while working with my fellow advocates and with Eliza.
Everything Jamani said. And also, I think relationship building, the more you get to know people, even if you don't know why you're meeting with them, sometimes you just meet with them for no reason, and then you learn things, and then they learn about you, and then when something really important comes up, they maybe give you information that you didn't know they would give you. You wouldn't have known to know them unless somebody had connected you. So I think that's been something that's maybe I knew, but I'm really feeling it now.
Well, I ditto everything my colleagues have said so far. I would just like to, of course, add a little bit more, which is before coming to Nature Forward, I was more in the lab side of things, so working in biology, more of the life sciences, you would call it, side of things. So I think what I brought to this position is more of strategic thinking and planning and organizing, which has come very helpful when leading coalitions or like planning long term, like how are we going to reach a goal for a certain legislation. I'm not as well versed as my colleagues, I would say, in other skills. For example, I still get very shy public speaking, but I'm working on that. But I think it's a nice combination and a mix that we have within all of our colleagues here, within the Conservation Department and across all of Nature Forward. So I think when we have each other to back us up and help each other, that really makes a dream team, really.
I'm quick to shout out my fellow advocates. I would say definitely Renee is great on relationship building, and when it comes to me and Renee talking to Denise, she has all the systems in place needed and helps us really get organized, and I just have to appreciate that.
And I would say outside of the conservation team, people like Lisa Goodnight and Vince Robinson and prior Caroline Brewer, I don't know how I would get messaging out if it wasn't for them. Talking to the press is terrifying. I guess that's part of advocacy, but they've helped to really hone what you say and how you say it and how to make sure what you're saying gets through or gets quoted, or how you write action alerts. I mean, they're geniuses, so they're helping us to learn. That's definitely a great skill.
That's our communications department, our communications and marketing department, for those who don't know. Anything else? You guys this has been a productive question. Do you have more? I mean, I think this is the heart of it. I think when our volunteers are working with us, and maybe this applies to you, they don't always tell me the names of exactly every person, who's contributed in every single way. But I heard, for example, that some of our research volunteers were super excited to help write some testimony, research and write some testimony, but shied away from actually signing up to deliver it orally, which is fine, totally fair. Not everybody wants to do that. But, I think what you've seen is there's a whole broad spectrum of skills, and you don't have to be super comfortable with all of them to be an advocate, but it really helps to have a team.
Yeah, on that front, I would say before I worked for Nature Forward, my background's in tech, so I didn't do advocacy. I didn't know I was doing advocacy in my own HOA when I was doing it. But I got really involved in native plant legislation early on, and they wanted a volunteer to research what the different ordinances were around the area, and so I started getting into that for Plant Nova Natives. And I remember having a call with Kathy Ledeck, who is this amazing advocate in Fairfax County. And I was on the phone with her. I remember it so distinctly, sitting on my back porch. And she said, "You just got to go testify, Renee." And I said, I can't do that. How do you do that? I don't even know where to go. I don't know how to sign up. I don't know what you'd say. And that was probably in 2017, I guess. I started here in 2019. And so I guess maybe a couple years ago, we ended up doing a webinar with Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions that tried to lay out, what does testifying mean? Like, what do you do as you step into the room? Where do you go? Like, all of those things to reduce that barrier, because it's just terrifying. I mean, if I can't do it, I do it
the
now.
pictures that are up are all you testifying.
Oh, yeah. Now I do that. I actually testified last night, and it was probably the first time I got up there, and I didn't feel like I was shaky, because I actually have had meetings now one-on-one with most of the supervisors. So now I feel like I know them a little bit better. They're more human to me. That's helpful. But the first time I went up there, whew, scary.
I have more questions, and we will have time for your questions as well. So if you've got questions, get ready. This is an important question, and this is, how are you working to, I touched on this about the outreach, but I want to again ask you about how, not just what or where, but how. How are you working to grow our base of advocates through your outreach projects? How are you changing the topics that you take on, the voices you include, and how much are they taking action themselves when you're working with community members who have a lower level of access to the inner workings of government, for example? What kinds of action are they feeling inspired to take themselves, and how are you helping them?
So I can speak about the two projects that we've done in Silver Spring. So the first one, well, we've had a couple ones, but the last two were the Si Se Puede project, which worked with families, 10 families for a period of 2 years. And also now we're working with a group of 18 high school students around the Long Branch neighborhood as well. So in both cases, what we did is we kind of met with them regularly, with the first group for around 2 years. For the second group, it's going to be for a year. And we kind of talked with them to see what actually mattered to them in their communities and what they were interested in advocating for. So with the first group, they found that litter and recycling were a big problem. So what they did is they went door to door knocking and handed out recycling information about how to recycle, and also did a survey to see like if the apartment buildings that were near the Long Branch stream had a recycling bin. And those that didn't, we contacted DEP and we put them in contact so they would actually receive a recycling bin. The Department of Environmental Protection in Montgomery County. And then with the high schoolers that we're working with, we are just transitioning into this phase to see what projects they would like to work on. So we just kind of had a series of sessions with them where we introduced them the various agencies that work in the county, what resources are out there. So when they're putting together their project, they know what resources are there so that they can create that project. So I think overall, to grow basically this network is to really listen to the community's needs and put their needs first, and kind of empower them, give them the tools that they need so that they can create their action projects that best benefits their own communities as well.
Yeah, I will echo Denise. Similar to Si Se Puede and Ward 8, we have the Ward 8 Water Watchers program, which is in collaboration with two other partners, the Green Scheme and the Well with DC Greens, or the Well at Oxen Run, which is a part of DC Greens. And it is a combination of watershed education activities and events that community members, students, residents are able to attend and learn more about their local stream, how, the macroinvertebrates that live in it, and just get a better understanding of the stream, what it means when they litter, and its impact. And in the second year of the program, we were able to expand that to an ambassador program, which is how I would say we're definitely growing advocates in that community, not only to be able to keep this a sustainable and community-led event or program, but also for them to learn and be as invested enough to do what we do every day, which is develop comments and opinions on what's actually happening in their community and be able to deliver those. So in our ambassador program, we took them through different things with the stream, but we also had a Raise Your Voice kind of program that would educate them on the different agencies, how they're able to get involved in the process. And since then, we've had at least two of our ambassadors be able to submit comments, particular to our zero waste plan that is in DC at the moment. One of them also works for Anacostia Riverkeeper and was able to, find employment to continue conservation work. So I feel like that's another way that we're making advocates, not only connecting them to actual advocacy avenues, but also conservation and green workforce opportunities, which they're able to use their own knowledge, their own intellect, and their own understanding of what's impacting their community to have that greater impact. And in doing so, they end up signing on the letters and everything, or even interacting with our action alerts. So, and we hope to continue to grow that and expand that to make it easier for people to be able to engage in the process. And I would also say, you said how. With the community I work with, a lot of the time, one, it's a lot of single parent households where I work. So they're not always able to take off of work and do the hearings from 9 to 5 p.m. and sit in and listen and talk, but they're able to submit comments, written comments, and those action alerts and those letter campaigns that they were able to send out. So that's something that's really great that people probably didn't know, that they were able to still have an opinion if they're not sitting there in that hearing room.
And with the water protectors of Little Hunting Creek, we'll be transitioning to follow the model Denise and Jimani are doing in their areas. So that work will be coming for how we get the community we've been working with to have an even stronger voice. Actually, at the public hearing last night, one of the volunteers that has worked with us down there testified for affordable housing, which was part of our testimony as well. But it was great to see her there through our partner, United Community. She had worked through Good Shepherd Housing, another one of our partners. I would say one thing that, in addition to everything that Denise and Jimani said, is sometimes we just hold webinars that are information sessions about the topics that we're advocating for. So with North Fax West and the city of Fairfax, we hosted a bunch of webinars that community members could come and just learn and ask questions so that they can feel like they have the knowledge to go actually advocate, with how deep the issue is. And we're doing the same kind of thing, coming up with other issues as well.
I just want to add one more thing. about the how. So it's not only about the how can we get more people involved in advocacy, but also how the agencies or the government that is asking for those comments engaging with different communities, not the traditional communities. So that reminds me of a couple times within our work with Long Branch. For example, Montgomery Parks is doing a renovation of about 9 parks along the Long Branch Stream corridor valley. And they've had like online meetings, in-person meetings, but all during like normal week like hours, like 9 to 5. So we've been advocating for them to do more meetings, like in parks, in festivals, in the weekends, at evenings, bilingual, and all of that has been increasing, and that's all thanks to our community members, but also our partners talking with the park staff and letting them know that this is a better way to engage with a broader range of community members. We also did that for Thrive 2050, and I believe we did it for a couple other campaigns that we had been working on. So I think it is both ways of growing not only the advocates, but also how the agencies engage with different communities.
Thank you for touching on that, Denise, because I think that speaks to a matter of like accessibility that we often see in our systems. I think all across the region for sure. And I think other ways that that I'm able to work with coalitions in DC is being able to work with our other partners that host webinars, like Renee mentioned, and comprehensive like breaking down the process, but breaking down down the talking points to how we can actually have more people be involved and be interested. Because it's not that people don't necessarily care, but it's the matter of, are they able to access the information in a way that they can understand it, and are they able to be present when they actually can.
So that was great, y'all, and very serious. Now I want to talk about dressing up as a building. Going to really big rallies, carrying around megaphones, signs. So tell me about some times that advocacy can be silly or include costumes or chants. Maybe some of you in the audience have done some fun kind of activism advocacy. You're welcome to ask questions as well. But yeah, tell me something silly that you've done.
Well, since you mentioned dressing up as a building, that's me. So I'll go first. Yeah, that was when we passed the Electrify Buildings Act in Montgomery County last fall. And actually, it was kind of funny how we got involved in this campaign kind of last minute. It was because the forest bill, which, as I mentioned earlier, we had been working on for past 3 years. And the last council was actually supposed to take a final vote on it last fall, but they didn't, and they pushed it to this new council. So we had a little bit of a waiting hold period where we could actually engage in some other campaigns in the meantime. And some of our other external advocates and partners say, hey, we have this electrify buildings legislation, do you want to get involved? And I was like, sure. And I show up to the rally, and they needed people to, dress up as a building. And I was like, sure, let me help. And that's how I ended up being a building and in the front. Yeah. And this is also another bill that passed last fall. So very excited.
I haven't dressed up as a building or anything else fun.
Okay, but all right, but Renee, I don't know if you can see it. Tell us about this picture.
Yeah.
Tell us about the big picture on this slide.
This is probably back in 2019 or maybe early 2020 when I was still very nervous giving testimony. And I walked in, this is the boardroom in Fairfax County, and I walked in and everyone in that room had a sticker that said, "Guns save lives." And I just remember thinking, oh, wow. Okay, I'm just here to testify on something environmental, but there's some other very big issue here today. And it was just very daunting. It was hard to find a seat. It throws you off your game. You know you're going to get up there and talk yourself, and it's just very. It's just hard to walk into a room that's that packed and with a topic that's such a passionate topic as well. Yesterday, when I walked into the room, there was no one there. I was speaker number 3. I've gotten much wiser in my days to sign up immediately when the openings come. And by the time I left, it was quite packed, but with people advocating for affordable housing, which was a great to see, a different feel than this day. So it was a lesson in serenity.
I'll share one. So before Denise came on board, I did focus a lot of my advocacy as the conservation director on Maryland and Montgomery County because that's where we've historically had our greatest strengths and on clean water. And I continue to co-chair the Stormwater Partners Network of Montgomery County and kind of provide our stormwater expertise whenever we need it. And in 2018, we had a really big budget fight about stormwater funding in Montgomery County. Executive Leggett wanted to reduce funding for stormwater, and it was quite a challenging battle. And what we ended up doing, and you'll see this if you ever see a clip of a charged public hearing, people will carry signs into the hearings and they'll make noises, and almost inevitably the speaker or the president of the council or whatever will tell them to be quiet, but they are sometimes allowed to hold up their signs. Sometimes they're not allowed to hold up their signs, but nobody can police what you're wearing. So we attended several just committee meetings, but where they were having these ferocious discussions about the budget. No public speaking opportunity. We were just sitting there, but we all wore blue for clean water. So I just got like 8 or 9 people to come. Elaine came one of those times, I think. We just wore blue t-shirts and we sat where the council members could see us while they were interrogating the poor people at the Department of Environmental Protection about their stormwater program. And that alone didn't do it. It wasn't like showing up in blue t-shirts is going to sway people's opinions, but we were quite relentless on that campaign. And we asked the incoming council candidates what they would do with the stormwater funding. We wore the blue t-shirts. We testified over and over. We had lobbying meetings over and over. We had meetings with the executive's office and with different council offices over and over and over. And each piece adds up, but being creative and visual helped the department, which was really feeling under the gun, see that we supported their programs. And that helped because one thing I want to just mention, and you guys have touched on this a little, but these are humans what we're advocating to. They get up in the morning, they have to make breakfast, they have to take their children to school, they have to put on their underwear. They are humans and they are nervous also, even if they've been doing it for a long time. And they don't always know if they're doing the right thing. And they don't always have the confidence of their superiors or their overlords. And they are constantly between a rock and a hard place, trying to make the right decision with tax pressures, budget pressures. Somebody wants this, somebody wants that. Somebody ideologically opposed to them completely has just gotten elected. Oh no, what are they going to do? So I think it's just very important to remember that being kind in advocacy really can go a long way, and treating the people who we want to change their decision as humans goes a long way. So even when we're doing something kind of silly and goofy and meant to pressure them, like dress up as buildings, we can do so in a way that doesn't include personal attacks, and that's very important to us. So, last question I have before we move to the audience. How can volunteers engage? We've talked a little bit about it, but is there anything else you want to add about how volunteers can engage? Jimani?
Well, I see some of our lovely volunteers in the audience tonight, so shout out to you all for being here. But I think there's so many ways that volunteers can engage, and we actually just had our meeting today. But I've been able to engage with volunteers primarily with research, even our outreach efforts, as well as just their own personal insight. We have a lot of volunteers with an array of different backgrounds. Some more knowledgeable on different issues than we all are, and it's really a blessing to have such that insight. And so some things that you already know and you are strong in being able to bring that to us is really great. But also just like really great energy, I would say, from our volunteers, and the desire to want to learn. One of our volunteers, I'm looking at you now, but she always isn't as confident in maybe what she might be able to be doing, and with working with me in particular. But every time it's like amazing, it's 110%, and I really appreciate it every single time. But just the small things really help impact our work, because we do, as Eliza said, we do a lot of things. So even having like an extra fact here or there, or having an extra personal story in our testimony is able to really impact the work and how we deliver it.
Well, again, everything that Giovanni said. We have these monthly meetings with our volunteers, so that's a great way to get involved and kind of know what all of us were working in our regions and how you can get involved. I'm just going to put a plug for something that's coming up in Maryland. So we have a tree and flower planting in Edmundston scheduled for this Saturday, but it might get rescheduled for next week. So if you're interested, stop by and let me know or send me an email. But yeah, I think it's just wonderful to work with the Nature Forward volunteers, because they bring so much richness and knowledge and enthusiasm to all of our programs, whether it be writing bills, researching for a bill, or in our outreach efforts in person, interacting with the community members. So please get involved.
I want to add one thing, which is that we get a lot of volunteers either when they retire or when they're interested in a career shift and they want to gain some expertise, some experience in a new universe. Some people, I'm thinking about David Blockstein, have the experience and the energy and the interest in kind of going it alone. I mean, you're not alone, but he takes on a lot of initiatives that he leads himself. And David doesn't volunteer with us directly on our research projects, but he sometimes tells us what we should be working on because he's doing it in his own volunteer capacity with other organizations where he has a leadership role. Elaine is the president of Friends of Sligo Creek, and she has been involved deeply in that organization for a long time. She doesn't volunteer directly with Nature Forward, but in her volunteer role with Friends of Sligo Creek, we partner with her. She can tell us what we should work on. She's a member of Stormwater Partners Network, and when we produce countywide efforts on stormwater management, then her group will sign on, and she is one of the people who liaises with us on these issues. So those are two kinds of volunteer roles that have a lot to do with advocacy that are not about being a volunteer with us. I just want to point out there's a lot of ways to volunteer in this world. Where our volunteer program on advocacy has become really powerful over the last year and a half, since Jumani started organizing it to be really cohesive, is gathering people who are interested in helping us research on these topics. So our model is really a support model where we ask volunteers to learn, research, write, take notes, and provide support to the priorities that the staff is outlining and laying out. When there's a great match, sometimes we do have volunteers pick up and run with a campaign and have a more leadership role on that campaign. But we are not, we ask them to stay in very close contact with staff and make sure that it's hard to work across all these intersections. Sometimes people are very driven by one of those four. We work really hard to ground our advocacy in all four of our conservation priorities. And so that's one particular reason why it's important that we have a model where we have volunteer and staff supporting one another rather than a highly independent volunteer model. So if that appeals to you, talk to Jumani. Renee, did I interrupt you?
No, but things that we've had volunteers in Northern Virginia help us out with, writing blog posts, helping research the General Assembly, which moves so fast, and watching meetings that maybe I have a conflict with and reporting back on notes. We had one volunteer who sat in on work groups that we had to talk about the siting of trails. And I was part of the network, and we were, we roughly said that we had the green side and the bike side, even though the bike advocates advocate for green and the greens advocate for bikes. But in this case, we had this very contentious topic we were talking about, and I said to Eliza, I can't take notes. And she said, wait, we have someone that can take notes. So it was amazing to have notes that I didn't have to think about what I was writing. I could listen and be part of the conversation. So even something that might seem simple is so valuable that we get to report back on what exactly we talked about to our group. But then also just having hands on the ground in-person events like Denise and Jemani said, the range is huge. Writing testimony or writing comment letters that come up and I think, I don't know if I have time to get engaged in this, and Eliza will remind me, put it out to the volunteers and see what someone can do. And it's helped us raise our capacity, so it's been great.
We love our volunteers. Okay, I said that was my last question, but I have one more. What do you do to relax after you get out of this room with all these very intense gun advocates? How do you break it down, Denise?
Oh, I should have put something fun in the slides, but well, I guess some of you already know, but some of you don't, so it's a surprise. But yes, K-pop. Yay, Deborah wins. So for those that don't know, what is K-pop is Korean music, but it's not just pop music. It's just a term that's used for pop, R&B, rap, hip hop. So I'm a big like Korean culture, food, music kind of fan, and that's what I do in my free time. Just kind of enjoy reading, watching, and listening to as much K-pop as I can. Oh yeah, you guys.
I also love music, not necessarily K-pop, but I love going to concerts. Definitely do a lot of that. But one of my favorite things to do is rip out invasive plants. And when you are angry, it is such a good workout. It is so rewarding. You can take all of your anger out on killing something that isn't good for our ecology. And this past holiday season, I got my first mini chainsaw, and it is so great. It is great. So I highly recommend it if you want to really kill even larger invasive plants.
I'm so sorry we didn't have the pictures of this.
I would love to see Renee use that chainsaw. In my free time, I'm also a music fan. I like to go to concerts. I like to spend time outside in nature when my allergies are not attacking me. And I also enjoy like yoga, strength training. Those are just some of my hobbies, I guess I would say. And spending time with my nephew. He's so fun. He's 7.
And I have 2 little kids, 3 and 5, and they take up pretty much all my time that's not at work or taking care of my house. So your questions now. That's all my questions for this amazing panel. Maybe we should give you a round of applause. And just so you know, Conservation Cafes always end on time. That's 8:30. So we have a good amount of time for questions, but not infinite because we will end on time. So what are your questions for any of the 4 of us? Yes, Pat. Repeat the question first.
Yeah, so her question was about the AFI Film Festival, the Climate Stories Festival, and if the question is if I was involved with the Latino Health Initiative. So I was actually not involved with the Latino Health Initiative, but I was invited to be one of the panelists for the screening of the climate stories. And the climate stories, which you can go to Montgomery County DEP's website and just search climate stories, you can see all of them. They were put together by DEP and the various community members, and just talking about how climate change has impacted their lives and kind of bringing in their immigrant stories as well. So we had a very interesting panel with the actually some of the speakers from these films, but also other activists from other nonprofits that are working to basically look in climate legislation, or either at the county or at the state level. Yeah, so the follow-up part of the question is like, what are those climate stories being used in? And actually, that's a great question. So as far as I know, that they're actually showing it to as many different publics as possible. So they are taking it to the high schoolers. They're showing it at different community events. And even we use them as some of our testimonies actually during the General Assembly, because they're as another different way to really show a testimony of how people are being impacted by climate change.
Great. More questions? I saw Sergio and then Deborah. Sergio, oh, he wants you to go first, Deborah.
How do you find all those people, like when you put together the coalition, how do you get all those people? How do you know all those people are going to be working on that? How did you know for the forest conservation coalition? We got the Sierra Club and the Potomac Conservancy and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, all that. How did you get them all together and how did you know to do that?
So Deborah's question is, how do we make a coalition? How do we know who might want to be involved? How do we find them? How do we reach out to them? And I have an answer to that question, but I'll let some of you all go first as well, because there's some big regional answers, there's some theoretical answers, but then there's how it actually works on a local scale. So who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Well, right when I started in 2019, Eliza said, "Hi, we just started Fairfax Healthy Communities, and you're going to lead it." And I said, "What is that? And how do you lead a coalition? And who am I working with?" And it turns out that our co-chair on that also started in 2019, about maybe a month after I did. And so it was put into our laps. We had no idea what we were doing, I don't think, back then. But we've done a pretty good job now. I think it started off as maybe 12 or 15 organizations, and they were kind of the typical people who had worked together. So Coalition for Smarter Growth is our co-chair with Nature Forward. And so they kind of had a network of partners they worked with, and we had a network of partners that we worked with, and we brought them together. And now the network is, I think, 22 organizations large. And how do we get people to work together? Yesterday at my hearing, Cornerstones is a social services nonprofit in Fairfax County. We had invited them to apply. And the woman, the executive director, was there, and she had testified a couple people after me. And I was like, "Oh, we've sent them the application, but they haven't responded." So I grabbed her outside and said, "You got to be part of our network." And she's like, "Yeah, send over the application." So sometimes, how do you grow a coalition? You just remind them to come join you when you see them at a public hearing. But I think our partners know people, and we know people. And so the network kind of grows. As you get bigger, you get bigger. I think it's kind of a silly way to say it, but it kind of happens. And then I would say another story coming out of that is the more we meet, so this coalition we have in Fairfax County, we meet monthly, and we talk about a whole range of issues that affect healthy communities. So that might be affordable housing, that might be green space. But we got a whole coalition together to go talk to our chairman of Fairfax County, his policy person, and we talked about trees, and we had people from all different organizations there talking about why trees were important to them. And again, from Northern Virginia Affordable Housing Alliance to Fairfax NAACP to us to Coalition for Smarter Growth. And we all had stories about why trees were important. And it was, we do that for a lot of different topics. So I think, again, the more you talk, the more you find synergies and the more trust you build to be able to join different advocacy initiatives that you might create.
So I want to give the broad answer, because what Renee just said is like, how do you find the people? Which might have been the question you were asking, Deborah, but actually on a bigger scale, this is something that funders invest in. And there's theory and books you can read about how to make coalitions and how networks grow. And I took courses on how to organize. So actually when each of these advocates started, I said, here's your budget to take people out to coffee. Every month, at least, you need to take somebody out to coffee and buy them their coffee. It's not very expensive. We can afford it. And ask them what they do and tell them about what you do and get to know what your areas of shared interest are. So it's the relationship building, really intentional relationship building that can lead to that basis of trust that grows the coalition from the bottom up. But coalitions are also incentivized to grow from the top down. So in our region, we have a coalition of funders called the Chesapeake Bay Funders Network. A lot of funding in this area is driven by the water because of the Chesapeake Bay. And so the Chesapeake Bay Funders Network, they do prioritize equity and climate change, but at heart, they're organized around watershed issues because of the importance of cleaning up and keeping the bay healthy. And they know that things don't get done individually. So our funders care about how are we doing with coalitions? How are we managing the local coalitions that we lead? How are we participating in the regional coalitions that we serve on? How do we use the resources that come to us from national coalitions? Because there are coalitions at all scales. And for example, it was about 12 years ago that the Choose Clean Water Coalition was founded, and it's Chesapeake Bay watershed wide. It's focused on the bay, of course, but it's also really focused on the upper watersheds because most of this land of the bay is not close to the bay, right? It goes out to Pennsylvania, farm country. And we were a founding member of the Choose Clean Water Coalition and continue to sit on the steering committee ever since its inception. I sit on the steering committee of the Choose Clean Water Coalition. That's a coalition with hundreds of members across 6 states, only some of which we work in. But by being a steering committee member and by participating in that coalition, we all gain access to resources and expertise that can support us at our local level. And then we also give them ideas that are coming to us that they didn't necessarily have access to in Pennsylvania or in Delaware or in West Virginia, right? So coalitions nest and operate at different scales, and it's very intentional within our environmental movement to do an increasingly better and better and better job because we know that power comes from groups of people joining together. And sometimes those groups of people are very targeted in what they want to achieve, like Choose Clean Water. And other times, like Fairfax Healthy Communities, we intentionally choose broader topics so that we can broaden the scope of people who can be involved and broaden the potential power base. And so I don't know that that's the question you were asking, but I do want to share that it's a very important part of coalition building is they do not happen in a vacuum. They happen in a universe of support for them. Yes. So the question was, how do we handle when there are tensions? I don't know that the states themselves have tensions, but you mean in terms of priorities that could be at play, for example, the states in between DC, Maryland, Virginia, and how does Nature Forward handle those? I think this is mainly a me question because I try to unify our advocacy across the different jurisdictions. The tensions that the states have with one another over environmental issues, most frequently that I've observed do have to come to play with some watershed issues. For example, the Potomac is a drinking water source for parts of all of those jurisdictions, but exclusively for DC. So DC really, it's very important to Washington, DC that the upstream jurisdictions make sure that the Potomac is clean and drinkable. That is also very important to the state of Maryland, but it's most important to Montgomery County. So there's nesting issues there. We try to look for points of commonality. And in that example, the 10 Mile Creek campaign in 2014, none of us were here then, although Greg was, and Deborah was, and some of you as volunteers participated. That was a campaign where we needed, the coalition got support from Washington, D.C. on a land use issue in Clarksburg, Maryland, in Montgomery County, by making the argument that the overdevelopment in the upper watershed for Little Seneca Reservoir would impact the emergency backup drinking water supply for Washington, D.C., which is true. And so the council, D.C. Council, sent a letter to Montgomery County Council, which is very rare, saying, please protect this watershed. So that's one example. It wasn't that there was a tension, but we successfully, enabled a relationship when otherwise they ignore each other a lot of, on these types of issues as much as they can. And they can be pretty parochial. The tensions on environmental issues, I don't think are that great cross-state for this specific jurisdictions. It's much different when you talk about bay issues between like Maryland and Pennsylvania who are suing each other. But fortunately, we don't have to step in that. It's outside of our area. Renee, you look like you have something to say.
Well, just having driven up here from Alexandria, the widening of 495 was not a tension within Nature Forward. We opposed each side of the widening, but if you drive up Virginia, you will see piles of trees half the height of houses all along the Beltway. And what did Maryland do? They're not moving forward with widening right now as Virginia is widening, and it's just really disappointing to see how the different states treated that transportation issue. But in terms of knowledge sharing, Denise would be able to share things with me of what was happening up in Maryland during their fight against the widening so that we could help influence what we were doing on our side as well. So it wasn't really a tension so much as but a cross-jurisdictional issue.
So David's question is, how do we deal when people are hostile or entities are hostile and we have major opposition? What do we do? Jumani, what do you say to Washington Gas?
Stop. Yeah, I mean, I haven't experienced any hostile interactions per se as it relates to like Washington Gas, but I know at one of the public hearings there. A lot of the comments from environmentalists were definitely like against project pipes, definitely against, them investing more money into, this gas infrastructure. And I think one of the last callers that wasn't present in the room, they had a lot of like commentary about, the unknown behind how people feel about electrification, right? So sometimes we don't know exactly what the cost is going to be, how it's actually going to impact residents financially. And there was like somebody on the call was just like, who said it's going to be better? Who said it's going to do this? Who's like not really having any substantial things to say, but really just asking those questions that are necessary. And my approach would definitely be I try to have those questions already answered when I go speak to people about different things, because that is something that's valid that people would want to know is, how is this going to impact? Yes, you're saying this is great for the environment, but as we talk about intersectionality and how different things weave financially, this is going to impact me. So what can you tell me about that? So really working with our coalition members and our the groups that we're working with to get those data points so people feel comfortable in also, coming to this side of the argument and wanting to support electrification rather than something sometimes it's just comfortability in what you're used to, but also having that data and those figures to say, okay, this is something that I can probably be okay with, both for the environment, for my health, and financially, but it has to work all together, honestly.
Yeah, I would second Jumani saying data. Have to use the data to really back up your arguments. You can't really deny the facts, deny the science. That actually came very handy with the forest bill, actually with both the Montgomery County and the state bill, because we had the Hughes Center report that came out in November, and no one could deny that we were losing our forests, especially in Montgomery and Prince George's County. So that really kind of pushed us and launched us forward to pass these legislations. Same goes with one of the first campaigns that back then the previous DC conservation advocate, Ari, we worked on the solar farm in Charles County for Georgetown University. We have found that there were certain species and tier 2 streams that cut through exactly where the 400 acres of trees were going to be chopped down basically to put a solar farm. And highlighting those data and those exact species that would be affected during our testimonies and the hearings and then the comments, that's what really canceled the wetlands permit that was basically pending to proceed with that project.
But I'm going to be real with you. Some of the most hostile people we encounter are on our side. And it makes sense. These are issues that people feel very passionately about. Climate change is terrifying. The loss of trees is horrifying. And so people can have very, very strong passions and feelings, and sometimes they express themselves not very professionally in doing so. And to a certain extent, that's okay. That kind of passion and energy can drive the movement, but it is not in keeping with sort of the nature forward ethos. We've never worked that way. We do a lot of work with our professional relationships with decision makers, and we cannot approach them with hostility. So some of the biggest challenges, and it's happened multiple times over my time with a variety of different people, that we have to manage some of our coalitions in a way that balances folks who feel more hostility about these issues and the way they want to engage with the way that we feel is the right way to engage. And it's just delicate relationship management, patience, finding the right roles for people so that they can express themselves in a way that is as productive as possible. And it's very challenging. I think we have time for one more question or a closing remark. Audience vote. Hands up for a question or hands up for a closing remark. What do you think? Closing remarks. All right, advocates, let's go in order. DMV. Jamani, what's your closing thought on being an advocate for the last year and a half and how that builds on your time before?
Yeah, I think it's very full circle for me to come from school, from college, and be able to work in advocacy, work in legislative matters, and then also being so involved in community service, to that being my whole life with what I do here with Nature Forward. So I definitely think it's a full circle moment, especially with my background. My family is 5 generations back in the city. So although I went to school in Prince George's County, it is such a blessing and an honor to be able to work on and be on behalf of my own community in the district. And every time I'm able to go down and do outreach activities, I'm able to see my family just down the street. So it's really a full circle moment, I would say. And I'm really grateful for what I've been able to learn, not only in the work that I'm doing, but with working with Nature Forward, our conservation team. And I look forward to continue doing this work. So, M.
Wait, me?
That's you.
Well, I have to say that I've just been feeling very, blessed to be in this environment, to work with so many great volunteers and advocates and colleagues, and mentors, of course, because without all these people coming together to work on these issues, I think it's going to be very hard to just work alone. But it's the combination of all the people working together that really creates this impact and this change. And then I was actually just reflecting as the 2 forest bills passed, both in Montgomery and in the state level recently, that way back when I was in college, maybe even high school, when I was thinking about what career path I wanted to do. And I always knew that I wanted to work in biology or do something to protect the world or the environment. And I just didn't know exactly how that would be. And now that I've seen these laws, like the forest laws, pass, I can see, even though it takes a lot of time to do these changes, if you just keep being persistent every step of the way, every year, you'll get somewhere. And I think that's a motivation to keep me going forward, but also to let others know that it's going to take a while, but you just have to keep working on it.
I guess I'll say I came to nature by just liking birds. I like birds. It's pretty simple. Then I got to like plants. Now I like bugs and plants. Birds are kind of secondary now to bugs and plants. And so I got really involved in our homeowners association because my yard's really tiny. I live in a tiny little townhome, but they have got a lot of property. So I started planting plants there and advocating for deer management and tree plantings. And it was through that work that I got introduced to Monica Bilger, who was the Northern Virginia conservation advocate here. And someone connected me with her and said, oh, Audubon Naturalist Society at that point wants to learn about how to advocate in HOAs. So I was like, okay. So I had coffee with her, and I was like, wow, your job's amazing. And she said, you can't have my job. I said, no, that's fine. I don't want your job. I don't know. This is probably, I don't know, maybe a year or something before I learned that she had moved on to another job. And I thought, wow, could I do her job? I don't know. That's totally different from what I was doing. But it's been a real process. Like I talked about Kathy Ledeck encouraging me to do testimony and how I just never thought I could do that. And seeing the progression of what you can come from, of just liking birds to being an advocate. I think everyone in this room can do that, whether it's professionally or just, as in your own free time. But it's a great feeling to think that you can work together with so many people and change decisions based on your voice mattering and being a really important component of that, and driving whole communities to speak up, right? Because just one person at Nature Forward is not going to change somebody's decision in terms of like the leadership, but a whole community talking about it will. And so that power in groups is so powerful. And I think I've just been able to learn and see that through this work at Nature Forward. So I also feel very fortunate, like others have mentioned.
Well, thank you, and thank you all. It's just, for me, an honor and a blessing to get to work with these folks. I've got to teach them a little bit of what I've learned in school in my prior career, but I also have learned so much from them, as you can tell. They come blessed with so much wisdom and experience and skills, and we're lucky as an organization. I'm really lucky as a boss. And we're also all, I just want to be clear that when we meet as a team, we meet with Greg too, and he's our watershed guy back there, and he tells us what we need to know about streams. And I'm just very grateful to have the opportunity to lead this department, lead this program, and have you all doing all this advocacy work with us. So thanks for coming.